The Haveli loomed at the edge of the village, a crumbling relic of a bygone era, its silhouette jagged against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Its walls, once painted in vibrant hues of saffron and indigo, were now peeling, streaked with moss and the stains of forgotten monsoons. The windows, dark and hollow, stared out like unblinking eyes, watching the fields that stretched endlessly before it. The villagers avoided the place, their footsteps quickening as they passed, their voices dropping to whispers. They spoke of shadows that danced behind the cracked curtains, of voices that echoed through the empty halls when no one was inside. The children, bolder in their curiosity, spun tales of a curse that clung to the Haveli's bones, a darkness born of blood spilled long ago on the land where it stood. They dared each other to approach its rusted gates, but none had ever crossed the threshold, until tonight. 4 friends, Rahul, Vikram, Arjun and Samir, stood at the edge of the village, their breath visible in the cool night air. The moon hung low, a sickly crescent casting just enough light to make the Haveli's outline menacing. They were 16, caught in that restless age where bravado outstripped sense, where proving courage meant everything. The challenge had started as a joke over a game of cards in Rahul's courtyard, fueled by too many glasses of sweet syrupy cola and the thrill of defiance. "Nobody's been inside the Haveli in years," Vikram had said, his voice sharp with mischief. "You're all too scared to try." Arjun, the quiet one, had laughed it off at first, but Samir, always eager to prove himself, had slammed his hand on the table. "Let's go tonight. We'll show there's nothing to fear." And so, here they were, staring at the iron gates, their confidence wavering under the weight of the Haveli's silent gaze. Rahul, the unofficial leader, adjusted the flashlight in his hand, its beam cutting a thin, trembling path through the darkness. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice lower than he meant it to be. He was the tallest, with a lanky frame and eyes that always seemed to see more than he let on. Vikram, stocky and brash, snorted, "Don't tell me you're backing out now, Rahul. You're the one who said it's just an old house." Arjun shifted uncomfortably, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It's not just a house," he muttered. "You've heard the stories. People don't come back the same." Samir, the smallest but fiercest, rolled his eyes. "Stories are for kids. Come on, let's do this before we freeze out here." The gates were taller up close, their iron bars twisted into ornate patterns now choked with rust. They creaked as Rahul pushed them open, the sound sharp and grating, like a warning. The air changed as they stepped onto the Haveli's grounds, growing heavier, thicker, carrying the scent of damp earth, and something older, sharper, like the memory of decay. The path to the main door was overgrown with weeds, their brittle stalks crunching underfoot. The boys moved closer together, their shoulders brushing, their bravado fraying with each step. The Haveli seemed to lean toward them, its walls whispering secrets in a language too old to understand. The front door was massive, carved with intricate floral designs that had faded into ghostly outlines. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Rahul hesitated, his flashlight beam darting across the entrance. "Maybe we should just take a picture from here and call it done," he said, half hoping the others would agree. Vikram shoved past him. "No way, we're going inside. You want the whole village laughing at us tomorrow." He pushed the door wider, and it groaned, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. The beam of the flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, illuminating only a sliver of the grand hall inside. Marble floors cracked and dull, cobwebs draped like veils across the ceiling. They stepped inside, the air colder now, clinging to their skin like damp cloth. The hall was vast, its walls lined with faded portraits of men and women in traditional attire, their turbaned heads and kohl-rimmed eyes staring down with stern disapproval. The frames were warped, the canvases yellowed, but the eyes seemed alive, following the boys as they moved deeper into the Haveli. This place is creepy as hell, Arjun whispered, his voice barely audible. Samir, trying to keep his nerve, forced a laugh. It's just a house, Arjun. Probably some rich guy's old mansion, but his words sounded hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The flashlight flickered, its beams stuttering across the walls. Rahul shook it, muttering under his breath, but it steadied only slightly. Batteries must be low, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. They moved forward, their sneakers scuffing against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The air grew heavier the deeper they went, pressing against their chests, making each breath feel like a struggle. The portraits seemed to multiply, their faces growing more severe, more watchful. One painting, larger than the rest, hung at the far end of the hall. A man in a turban, his beard thick and black, his eyes so piercing they seemed to burn through the canvas. "Who's that guy?" Samir asked, his voice cracking. Nobody answered. They stopped at a crooked frame, smaller than the others, its glass coated in a thick layer of dust. Vikram, always the boldest, reached out and wiped it clean with his sleeve. The glass glinted under the flashlight's beam, revealing an old photograph inside. It was sepia-toned, faded but strangely preserved, as if time hadn't dared touch. The boys leaned closer, their breaths catching as they saw the image. 5 boys no older than they were, standing in this very hall. The background was unmistakable, the same cracked marble, the same looming portraits, but it was the faces that made their blood run cold. 4 of them looked eerily familiar, their features mirroring Rahul's sharp jaw, Vikram's broad shoulders, Arjun's nervous eyes, Samir's defiant smirk. The 5th boy, standing slightly apart, was a stranger, his face blurred, his smile faint and unsettling. "What the hell is this?" Vikram's voice was a hoarse whisper. He stepped back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rahul's hand shook, the flashlight beam trembling across the photograph. It's us," he said, the words barely forming. "But that's impossible. We've never been here before." Arjun's eyes were wide, his breath coming in short gasps. "That 5th guy, who is he?" Samir grabbed the frame, yanking it off the wall as if to prove it wasn't real. The glass shattered on the floor, the sound exploding through the hall like a gunshot. The photograph fluttered down, landing face up, and the boys stared at it frozen. The 5th boy's face seemed clearer now, his smile wider, almost mocking. A cold draft swept through the hall, sharp and sudden, carrying the faint sound of chains dragging across stone. The flashlight flickered again, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. "Rahul, turn it back on," Samir shouted, his voice edged with panic. Rahul smacked the flashlight against his palm, but it stayed. The air grew colder, the scent of decay stronger, wrapping around them like a shroud. From somewhere deep within the Haveli came another sound, a low, rhythmic thud, like footsteps moving closer. The boys pressed together, their bravado gone, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to get out," Arjun whispered, his voice trembling. But even as he spoke, the sound of chains grew louder, closer, echoing from the direction of a narrow doorway at the end of the hall. It was half hidden behind a tattered curtain, its edges blackened, as if scorched. Rahul's eyes darted to the photograph on the floor, and for a moment he swore the 5th boy's eyes moved, locking onto his. "We shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But something tugged at him, at all of them, a strange insistent pull, like an invisible hand guiding them toward the doorway. Vikram, his bravado crumbling, shook his head. "This is a bad idea, guy. Let's just..." But before he could finish, the curtain fluttered, as if stirred by a breath, and the doorway seemed to beckon. They moved toward it, their feet heavy as if drawn by a force they couldn't resist. The air grew colder with each step, the scent of damp earth and decay now overwhelming. The doorway led to a staircase, its steps descending into a blackness, so thick it seemed to swallow light itself. The sound of chains was unmistakable now, a slow, deliberate drag, like something heavy being pulled across a stone floor far below. Rahul gripped the flashlight tighter, willing it to work, but it remained lifeless in his hand. "We don't have to go down there," Arjun said, his voice pleading. But Samir, his jaw set, pushed past him. "We're already here. We can't back out now." His words were brave, but his hands shook as he took the first step. The staircase creaked under their weight, each step groaning as if protesting their presence. The walls were damp, slick with something that felt like more than just water. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against their lungs. The sound of chains grew louder, more insistent, and now there was something else. A faint whisper, like voices speaking in a language they didn't understand. Rahul's heart raced, his mind screaming at him to turn back, but his feet kept moving, pulled by that same strange force. The photograph's image burned in his mind. The 4 boys who looked like them, the 5th who didn't. What did it mean? And why did the Haveli feel alive, watching, waiting? At the bottom of the stairs, the air was so cold it burned their skin. The flashlight flickered once, weakly revealing a heavy iron door, its surface etched with symbols none of them recognized. The sound of chains came from beyond it, slow and deliberate, accompanied by a low guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Vikram grabbed Rahul's arm, his grip tight. "We're not going in there," he said, his voice broke. But before anyone could agree, the door creaked open on its own, just a crack, and a wave of icy air poured out, carrying the unmistakable scent of rust and rot. The boys stood frozen, staring into the darkness beyond, knowing they had crossed a line they could never uncross. The Haveli had claimed them, and it wasn't letting go. The grand hall of the Haveli seemed to tighten around the 4 boys, Rahul, Vikram, Arjun and Samir, as they stood frozen, the shattered glass of the photograph frame glinting at their feet. The sepia-toned image lay face up on the cracked marble floor, its 5 figures staring back with an eerie clarity that made their stomachs churn. 4 of the faces were unmistakably theirs: Rahul's sharp jaw, Vikram's broad shoulders, Arjun's nervous eyes, Samir's defiant smirk. But the 5th boy, standing slightly apart, was a stranger, his features blurred yet sharp enough to suggest a faint, unsettling smile. The air in the hall was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, and something older, sharper, like the memory of a grave. The flashlight in Rahul's hand flickered weakly, its beam barely cutting through the oppressive darkness, as if the Haveli itself were resisting the light. "What is this?" Vikram whispered, his voice hoarse, his usual bravado replaced by a tremor. He stepped back, his sneaker crunching on the broken glass, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent hall. Rahul couldn't tear his eyes from the photograph. "It's us," he said, his words barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might make it more real. "But how? We've never been here before." Arjun, his hands trembling in his pockets, shook his head. "That's not possible. It's got to be some kind of trick." Samir, ever defiant, snatched the photograph from the floor, holding it closer to the flickering flashlight. "This is fake," he said, though his voice wavered. "Someone's messing with us." But as he tilted the image, the 5th boy's face seemed to shift, the blur sharpening for a moment, his eyes glinting with something alive, something watching. The portraits lining the walls seemed to lean closer, their turbaned figures and kohl-rimmed eyes boring into the boys. The largest painting of the stern man with the burning gaze loomed at the end of the hall, its presence heavier now, as if it were drawing the darkness tighter around. The air grew colder, the draft that had swept through earlier now, a constant icy breath that prickled their skin. From somewhere deep within the Haveli came the sound again, chains dragging slowly across stone, a low metallic scrape that echoed through the hall like a heart. Rahul's flashlight flickered out completely, plunging them into darkness, so thick it felt like a physical weight. "Turn it back on," Samir shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Rahul smacked the flashlight against his palm, but it stayed dead. "It's not working," he snapped, his own fear sharpening his tone. Arjun's breath came in short, ragged gasps. "We need to leave, now." But Vikram, his eyes darting to the photograph still clutched in Samir's hand, shook his head. "We can't just leave, not after seeing that." He pointed at the image, his finger trembling. "That's us in there, and that,"
That other guy. We need to know what's going on. The chain's sound grew louder, closer, as if something were moving toward them from the depths of the hab. The boys pressed closer together, their shoulders brushing, their earlier bravado a distant memory. The photograph felt like a weight in Samir's hand, its edges sharp against his fingers. He dropped it, and it landed face down, but not before Rahul swore he saw the fifth boy's smile widen. Just for a moment, the darkness seemed to pulse, the walls themselves breathing, and the air carried a new scent, rust, like old blood. The narrow doorway at the end of the hall, half hidden behind a tattered curtain, seemed to beckon, the chain's sound emanating from beyond it. We should go back, Arjun said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes fixed on the door. But Rahul felt it again, that strange insistent pull, like an invisible thread tugging at his chest, urging him toward the darkness. He glanced at the others, seeing the same conflict in their eyes, fear warring with a compulsion they couldn't explain. We've come this far, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. If we run now, we'll never know what this place is hiding. Vikram nodded, though his jaw was tight. Yeah, let's figure this out and get the hell out. Samir, still clutching the photograph, swallowed hard. Fine, but if anything moves, I'm gone. They moved toward the doorway, their steps slow, deliberate, as if each one required a battle against their instincts. The curtain fluttered as they approached, though there was no breeze to stir it. Rahul reached out, his hand shaking, and pulled the fabric aside. The doorway revealed a staircase descending into a blackness, so absolute it seemed to swallow the edges of the world. The chain's sound was unmistakable now, a slow rhythmic drag, accompanied by a faint whisper, like voices speaking in a language too ancient to understand. The air from the staircase was colder, sharper, carrying the scent of rust and rot, as if the Haveli's secrets were buried deep below. Rahul's flashlight flickered back to life, its beam weak but enough to illuminate the first few steps. The walls were damp, streaked with dark stains that glistened like oil. This is a bad idea, Arjun muttered, but he followed as Rahul took the first step, the wood creaking under his weight. The staircase seemed to stretch forever, each step colder than the last, the air growing heavier, pressing against their lungs. The portrait's eyes seemed to follow them even here, though the walls were bare, as if the Haveli's gaze had seeped into the very stone. The chain's sound grew louder, more deliberate, and now there was something else, a low guttural hum, like a chant from a forgotten ritual. Halfway down, Samir stopped, holding up the photograph. Look at this, he whispered, his voice trembling. The flashlight's beam caught the image, and the boys gasped. The background had changed. The 5 boys in the photograph were no longer in the grand hall. They were standing at the top of this very staircase, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. The 5th boy's face was clearer now, his smile sharper, his eyes locked on the camera, as if he knew they were watching. This can't be real, Vikram said, his voice breaking. This is some kind of sick joke. But Rahul shook his head, his heart pounding. It's not a joke. It's this place. It's doing something to us. The chain's sound stopped abruptly, the silence heavier than the noise. The boys froze, their breaths loud in the stillness. Then from below came a single deliberate thud, like a footstep on stone. Then another. Rahul's flashlight flickered again, the beam stuttering across the walls, revealing more of those strange glistening stains. They weren't random. They formed patterns, symbols etched into the stone like a warning. Arjun grabbed Rahul's arm, his grip bruising. We're not alone down here, he whispered. Samir's hands shook as he clutched the photograph, his eyes darting to the darkness below. What do we do? He asked, his voice small. Rahul didn't know. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to drag his friends back up the stairs and out of the Haveli. But that pull, that cursed, relentless pull, kept his feet rooted. We keep going, he said, his voice barely convincing himself. We need to know what's down there. Vikram cursed under his breath, but nodded, his fists clenched. Arjun's eyes were wet with tears, but he didn't argue. Samir, his jaw tight, tucked the photograph into his pocket, as if hiding it could erase its truth. The staircase ended at a heavy iron door, its surface etched with the same symbols they'd seen on the walls. The air here was so cold it burned their lungs. The scent of rust and rot so strong it made their eyes water. The chain's sound started again, slower now, deliberate, coming from beyond the door. Rahul reached for the handle, his hand trembling, but before he could touch it, the door creaked open on its own. Just a crack. A wave of icy air poured out, carrying a new sound, a low guttural laugh, barely human, that sent shivers down their spine. The flashlight's beam caught the edge of something inside, a massive wooden chair, its surface dark and polished, bound in heavy iron chains that glinted in the dim light. The chains moved slightly, as if stirred by an unseen hand, their links clinking soft. Rahul's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. "What is that?" Aryan whispered, his voice barely audible. Vikram stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. "It's just a chair," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Samir pulled the photograph from his pocket, holding it up to the light. The image had changed again. The 5 boys were now inside a room, standing before a chain chair, their faces twisted in terror. The 5th boy's smile was gone, replaced by a look of hunger, his eyes glowing faintly in the sepia frame. "We need to go," Aryan said, his voice rising with panic. But the door behind them slammed shut, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. The chains on the chair rattled violently, snaking across the floor, as if alive. The boys screamed, scrambling back, but the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the air growing thicker. Rahul's flashlight flickered out again, leaving them in darkness, the only sound a relentless drag of chains and their own ragged breaths. The Haveli had them now, and it wasn't letting go.
The iron door's slam echoed through the Haveli's basement, a final, bone-rattling clang that sealed the 4 boys, Rahul, Vikram, Arjun, and Samir, in darkness. The air was so cold, it stung their skin, thick with the stench of rust and rot, as if the Haveli itself were exhaling decay. The flashlight in Rahul's hand was dead, its weak beam extinguished, leaving only the faint glint of moonlight filtering through a high, cracked window, too small to offer escape. The sound of chains dragging across stone resumed, slow and deliberate, closer now, circling them in the pitch-black room. Fear clawed at their throats, their breaths coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The photograph, still clutched in Samir's trembling hand, felt like a lead weight, its impossible image burned into their minds. 5 boys, 4 of them unmistakably themselves, standing before a chained chair, with the 5th, a stranger watching with a hunger that wasn't human. "This can't be real," Arjun whispered, his voice cracking, barely audible over the metallic scrape of the chains. He pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his hands groping for the door that had just slammed shut. "We need to get out now." But the door was unyielding, its iron surface slick with condensation, or perhaps something worse. Rahul, his heart pounding so hard it hurt, shook the flashlight again, smacking it against his palm. Come on," he muttered, but it stayed dark. Vikram, his bravado shattered, grabbed Rahul's arm. "Forget the damn flashlight. We need to find another way out." Samir, his eyes wide with terror, held the photograph up, though there was barely enough light to see it. "This thing, it's changing," he said, his voice trembling. "It's like it's watching us." The chained sound grew louder, a rhythmic predatory drag that seemed to come from every direction. The boys huddled closer, their shoulders brushing, their earlier bravado a distant memory. The room felt alive, the walls pulsing with a low guttural hum that vibrated through their bones. Rahul's eyes darted to the photograph in Samir's hand, its sepia surface catching the faint moonlight. The image had shifted again. The 5 boys were now inside this very room, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. The fifth boy's face was clearer, his smile faint but unmistakable, his eyes glinting with a malevolent light that seemed to pierce through the paper. "We shouldn't have come here," Arjun said, his voice rising, edged with hysteria. "I told you, the stories, they're true." The village tales whispered by children and elders alike flooded back. The Haveli built on blood-soaked land, a Sardar who died in chains, his spirit bound to the house, demanding souls to sate his curse. Rahul had dismissed them as superstition, but now, trapped in this suffocating darkness, the stories felt like truth. "Shut up, Arjun," Vikram snapped, though his own voice shook. "Panicking won't help. We need to think." But thinking was impossible with the chain's relentless drag, the sound growing closer, as if whatever moved them was stalking them. Rahul's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he could just make out the massive wooden chair at the room's center, its surface dark and polished, bound in heavy iron chains that glinted like wet teeth. The chains moved slightly, slithering across the floor, their links clinking with a purpose that made his skin crawl. "That chair," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's wrong." Samir, still clutching the photograph, stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the chair. "It's the same one," he said, holding up the image. The photograph showed the 5 boys standing before it, the chains coiled around it like snakes, the 5th boy's eyes glowing faintly, as if he were part of the curse itself. A cold draft swept through the room, sharp and sudden, carrying a whisper that wasn't quite human, a low, guttural chant in a language none of them knew. The chains rattled violently, and the boys screamed, stumbling back, their backs pressed against the unyielding door. "What is that?" Arjun cried, his hands clawing at the iron, desperate for escape. Rahul's mind raced, the photograph's image seared into his thoughts. "It's the Haveli," he said, his voice steady despite the terror. "It's doing this. It wants something from us." Vikram cursed, his fists clenched. "Then let's give it the damn photograph and get out." But even as he spoke, the chains moved closer, their links scraping the stone floor, circling them like a predator, closing in. Samir dropped to his knees, fumbling in the dark for something, anything that might help. His fingers brushed against a small leather-bound book, its cover cracked and brittle. "Guys, look at this," he said, holding it up. The moonlight caught its surface, revealing faded script in an old curling hand, a diary. Rahul grabbed it, his hands shaking as he opened it. The pages were yellowed, the ink smudged but legible. The words were written in Hindi, the script formal, almost ceremonial. "It's about the Sardar," Rahul said, scanning the text. "He was betrayed, locked in this room, chained to that chair. He cursed this place before he died. Said no one leaves, unless," he trailed off, his throat tightening. "Unless what?" Vikram demanded, his voice sharp with fear. Rahul's eyes flicked to the diary, then to the chair, its chains glinting in the moonlight. "Unless one stays," he whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Arjun's breath hitched. Stays? What does that mean?" But before Rahul could answer, the chains lunged, their links snapping like whips. One coiled around Samir's ankle, yanking him toward the chair. He screamed, clawing at the floor, his fingers leaving streaks in the dust. "Help me," he shouted, his voice raw with panic. Rahul dropped the diary and grabbed Samir's arms, pulling with all his strength. Vikram and Arjun joined him, their hands slippery with sweat, their muscles straining against the impossible force of the chains. The metal was cold, unnaturally so, burning their skin where it touched. Samir's screams grew louder, his eyes wide with terror, as the chair loomed closer, its dark wood seeming to pulse with a life of its own. "It's not a trick," Arjun shouted, his voice breaking. "It's real. The curse is real." Rahul's mind raced, the diary's words echoing.
No one leaves. Unless one stays. He looked at the chair, at the chains, at the photograph still lying on the floor. Its fifth boy watching with that horrible knowing smile. We have to break it, Vikram said, his voice desperate. He lunged for the chair, grabbing one of the chains, but it snapped back, wrapping around his wrist. He cried out, yanking his hand free, his skin red and blistered. The chains moved faster now, slithering across the floor, cutting off every path to the door. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Rahul's eyes darted to the diary, its pages open to a passage about the Sardar's curse. One soul to bind, one soul to free. The chair demands its due. The words felt like a knife in his chest. He looked at his friends, their faces pale and drawn, and knew they were running out of time. Give it the photograph, Arjun shouted, his voice hysterical. Samir, still struggling against the chain around his ankle, nodded frantically. Yeah, maybe that's what it wants. Rahul grabbed the photograph from the floor, his hands shaking. The fifth boy's face was clearer now, his eyes glowing like embers, his smile wide and cruel. Rahul hesitated, then threw the photograph toward the chair, hoping it would appease whatever force held them. But the chains didn't stop. They tightened around Samir's leg, dragging him closer, his screams echoing through the room. We're not giving it what it wants, Rahul shouted, his voice cracking. He grabbed the diary again, flipping through its pages, searching for anything that might help. The script was frantic now, the Sardar's words scrawled in desperation. The chair is the heart of the curse. It binds one to free the rest. Choose, or it chooses for you. Rahul's heart sank. He looked at Samir, still fighting, at Vikram, his face twisted with fear, at Arjun, tears streaming down his cheeks. The chains were relentless, their links glinting in the moonlight, their movements almost alive, as if guided by the Sardar's will. We have to choose, Rahul said, his voice barely audible. The words felt like betrayal, but the diary was clear. One of them had to stay, or none would leave. Vikram shook his head, his eyes wild. No way. We're all getting. But the chains tightened, and Samir's screams grew weaker, his strength fading as the chair pulled him closer. Rahul's mind raced, the photograph's image flashing in his thoughts. The fifth boy, the stranger, waiting. Was he the one who stayed last time? Was he the curse's pride? The chains lunged again, this time grazing Arjun's leg, and he screamed, stumbling back. The room pulsed with that guttural hum, louder now, like a chant growing in strength. Rahul clutched the diary, his eyes scanning the final page. The photograph binds the truth. It shows what was, what is, what will be. He looked at the chair, at the chains, at his friends, and felt the Haveli's will pressing against him, urging a choice. The chains rattled, the air thickened, and the fifth boy's smile seemed to echo in the darkness, a promise of what was to come. They were out of time, and the Haveli was waiting. The basement of the Haveli pulsed with a malevolent energy, its air so thick with the stench of rust and rot that it clung to the boys' throats like a living thing. Rahul, Vikram, Arjun and Samir were trapped, the iron door behind them sealed shut, the chains on the floor slithering like serpents, their metallic clinks echoing in the suffocating darkness. The massive wooden chair, at the room's center, loomed larger now, its polished surface gleaming unnaturally in the faint moonlight filtering through a cracked, high window. Heavy iron chains bound it, their links glinting with a life of their own, coiling and uncoiling as if responding to an unseen command. Samir, still caught by a chain around his ankle, clawed at the stone floor, his screams hoarse as he fought to free himself. The diary, its brittle pages, open in Rahul's trembling hands, spoke of a curse that demanded a soul. One stays, or none leave. The photograph, lying discarded near the chair, showed 5 boys, 4 of them unmistakably the friends. The fifth, a stranger, whose glowing eyes and cruel smile seemed to watch from the sepia frame. Rahul's heart pounded, the diary's words searing into his mind. He glanced at Samir, whose face was pale, his strength waning as the chain dragged him closer to the chair. "Hold on!" Rahul shouted, dropping the diary and lunging forward, grabbing Samir's arm. Vikram and Arjun joined him, their hands slippery with sweat, pulling against the chain's impossible strength. The metal was cold, burning their skin where it touched, and it tightened with every tug, as if mocking their efforts. "It's not letting go!" Vikram yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. Arjun, tears streaming down his face, sobbed, "We're all going to die here." The room seemed to pulse in response, the walls vibrating with a low guttural hum, like a chant from a forgotten ritual, growing louder, more insistent. The chains rattled violently, and the chair seemed to shift, its wood creaking as if alive. In the dim light, a shadow moved within it, a figure, seated, its outline barely visible, but unmistakably human. The boys froze, their breaths catching as the figure's head tilted upward. Two glowing points like burning embers pierced the darkness, eyes alive with a fire that wasn't human. The air grew colder, the scent of decay overwhelming, and the chain surged, yanking Samir closer to the chair. He screamed, his nails scraping the floor, leaving bloody streaks in the dust. "Help me!" he cried, his voice raw, his eyes wide with terror. Rahul's mind raced, the diary's words echoing. "The chair is the heart of the curse. It binds one to free the rest." He looked at the figure, its ember-like eyes locked on them unblinking, as if weighing their souls. "Who are you?" Rahul whispered, his voice trembling. The figure didn't answer, but the chains moved faster, their links clinking with a rhythm that matched the hum, vibrating through the room. The photograph caught Rahul's eye, its sepia surface glinting in the moonlight. The fifth boy's face was clearer now, his smile gone, replaced by a look of hunger, his eyes mirroring the glowing embers of the figure in the chair. It was him, the Sardar, the one who died here bound by chains, his curse woven into the Haveli's very stones. "We have to do something," Vikram shouted, his voice breaking as he pulled at the chain around Samir's ankle. But the metal was unyielding, its links tightening like a noose. Arjun, his hands shaking, grabbed the diary from the floor, flipping through its pages with frantic desperation. "There's got to be a way out," he cried, his voice high and panicked. The pages were filled with the Sardar's scrawl, each word dripping with rage. "Betrayed by those I trusted, chained to this chair, my soul bound to this place. One must take my place, or all will perish." Arjun's eyes widened, his breath hitching. "It's him," he whispered, pointing at the figure. "The Sardar. He's still here." The chains lunged again, this time grazing Vikram's leg, and he yelped, stumbling back. The figure in the chair leaned forward slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing, as if savoring their fear. The hum grew louder, the walls trembling, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Rahul's mind spun, the diary's warning clear. "Choose, or it chooses for you." He looked at his friends, Samir gasping as the chain dragged him closer, Vikram clutching his blistered leg, Arjun clutching the diary like a lifeline. The photograph's image flashed in his mind, the fifth boy's face a mirror of the Sardar's, as if the curse had already marked its next victim. "We can't fight it," Rahul said, his voice barely audible over the chain's relentless clinking. "It wants one of us." Samir's eyes widened, his struggles weakening. "No, don't let it take me," he screamed, his voice breaking. Rahul's heart twisted, his mind racing for a way out. But the diary was clear, the curse absolute. He grabbed the photograph, holding it up to the figure in the chair, as if it could bargain with the curse. "Take this instead," he shouted, his voice desperate. But the figure's eyes only burned brighter, and the chains tightened, pulling Samir within inches of the chair's dark wood. Arjun, his face pale, read aloud from the diary, his voice trembling. "The curse binds one soul to the chair, freeing the other. The photograph shows the truth. What was, what is, what will be." He looked up, his eyes wet with tears. "It's showing us what's going to happen. One of us, has to stay." Vikram cursed, his fists clenched. "No way. "We're not leaving anyone." But the chains moved faster, their links snaking across the floor, cutting off every path to the door. The figure in the chair tilted its head, its glowing eyes shifting from Samir to the others, as if choosing. Rahul's hand shook as he held the photograph, its surface cold against his fingers. The image had changed again. The 5 boys were now seated in the chair, one by one, their faces twisted in terror, the 5th boy's eyes glowing like the Sardar's. "It's not just a picture," Rahul whispered. "It's a trap." The realization hit him like a blow. The photograph wasn't just showing them, it was binding them, marking them for the curse. He threw it to the floor, stomping on it, but the paper didn't tear, its surface unyielding, as if the Haveli itself protected. The chain surged again, and Samir screamed, his body now inches from the chair. The figure leaned closer, its glowing eyes locked on him, its shadowed form seeming to grow larger, filling the room. The hum was deafening now, a chant that shook the walls, the floor, their very bones. Rahul grabbed Samir's arms, pulling with all his strength, but the chain was too strong, its links cutting into Samir's skin. "Don't let go," Samir sobbed, his voice barely human. Vikram and Arjun pulled too, their faces red with effort, but the chair seemed to draw Samir in, its wood pulsing with a dark energy. "We have to break the chair," Vikram shouted, grabbing a loose stone from the floor and hurling it at the chair. It struck the wood, but the chair didn't splinter. Instead, the stone shattered, its fragments scattering across the floor. The figure in the chair laughed, a low guttural sound that echoed through the room, chilling their blood. The chains moved faster, one wrapping around Arjun's wrist, another grazing Rahul's leg. They screamed, stumbling back, but the chains were everywhere, their links glinting in the moonlight, their movements alive with purpose. Rahul's eyes darted to the diary, its pages open to the Sardar's final words. "The chair is eternal. The curse is eternal. One soul must bind to it, or all will be claimed." He looked at the figure, its glowing eyes now fixed on him, as if sensing his understanding. "It's not letting us go," he said, his voice hollow. "It's going to choose if we don't." Samir's screams grew weaker, his body now slumped against the chair, the chain pulling him onto its seat. The figure's eyes flared, and the chains tightened, binding Samir's to the chair, their links clinking with a triumphant rhythm. "We have to do something," Arjun cried, his voice breaking. He grabbed the diary, flipping through it frantically, but the pages offered no answers, only the same grim warning. Vikram lunged at the chair again, grabbing a chain that had burned his hands, and he fell back cursing. The figure in the chair leaned forward, its glowing eyes sweeping over them, and the hum grew louder, the walls shaking with its intensity. Rahul's mind raced, the photograph's image haunting him, the 5th boy, the Sardar, bound to the chair, his eyes glowing with the same fire as the figure before them. "We can't let it take him," Rahul said, his voice desperate. He pulled at Samir's arms, but the chain was unyielding, and Samir's struggles were fading, his eyes glassy with fear. The figure's laugh echoed again, deeper, more menacing, and the chain surged, wrapping around Samir's legs, pulling him fully onto the chair. The boys screamed, their voices lost in the hum, as the figure's glowing eyes flared brighter, and the Haveli itself seemed to close in, its curse tightening its grip. They were out of time, and the Sardar was waiting.
The basement of the Haveli was a tomb of shadows, its air thick with the stench of rust and rot, pressing against the boys' lungs like a suffocating shroud. Rahul, Vikram, Arjun, and Samir were trapped, the iron door behind them sealed, the massive wooden chair at the room's center pulsing with a dark, unnatural life. Heavy iron chains bound it, their links slithering across the stone floor, alive with purpose, their metallic clinks echoing like a heartbeat in the darkness. Samir was caught, a chain coiled tightly around his ankle, dragging him toward the chair despite his desperate struggles. His screams were raw, his nails clawing bloody streaks into the floor as he fought to break free. The figure seated in the chair, a shadowy man in a turban, his eyes glowing like burning embers, leaned forward, its gaze searing through them as if weighing their souls. The diary, lying open near Rahul's feet, revealed the curse's brutal truth. One soul must bind to the chair, or none will leave. The photograph, discarded in the dust, showed 5 boys, 4 of them unmistakably the friends. The 5th, a stranger whose glowing eyes mirrored the Sardar's, his smile cruel and knowing. Rahul's heart pounded, the diary's words a knife in his chest. Choose or it chooses for you. He grabbed Samir's arms, pulling with all his strength, his muscles burning as the chain tightened, its links cutting into Samir's skin. Hold on, he shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. Vikram and Arjun joined him, their hands slippery with sweat, their faces red with effort. But the chain was relentless, its strength unnatural, as if the Haveli itself were pulling Samir toward the chair. It's not letting go, Vikram yelled, his bravado gone, his voice trembling. Arjun, tears streaming down his face, clutched the diary, his eyes darting between its pages, and the figure in the chair. There's got to be another way, he sobbed, but the diary offered no escape. Only the Sardar's curse. One must take my place, or all will perish. The chains rattled violently, their links snapping like whips, and Samir's screams grew weaker, his body now inches from the chair's dark, polished surface. The figure's glowing eyes flared brighter, its shadowed form seeming to grow, filling the room with a presence that crushed the air from their lungs. The low, guttural hum that had haunted them since the staircase was deafening now, a chant that shook the walls, the floor, their very bones. The photograph glinted in the faint moonlight, its image shifting again. The 5 boys were now in the chair, one by one, their faces twisted in terror. The 5th boy's eyes burning with the same fire as the Sardar's. Rahul's mind screamed at him to run, to drag his friends back, but the chains were everywhere, circling them, cutting off every path to the door. We can't let it take him, Rahul shouted, his voice breaking as he pulled harder on Samir's arms. But the chain was unyielding, its links cold and burning, and Samir's struggles were fading, his eyes glassy with fear. Vikram grabbed a loose stone from the floor, hurling it at the chair, but it shattered on impact, the fragments scattering like ash. The figure laughed, a low guttural sound that echoed through the room, chilling their blood. It's not a trick, Arjun cried, his voice high with hysteria. The curse is real. It wants one of... He flipped through the diary's pages, his hands shaking, but the words were the same. The chair demands its due. One soul to bind, one soul to free. The chains lunged again, this time grazing Arjun's leg, and he screamed, stumbling back. Another wrapped around Vikram's wrist, burning his skin, and he yanked it free, cursing, his hand blistered and red. The figure in the chair leaned closer, its glowing eyes sweeping over them, as if savoring their fear. The hum grew louder, the walls trembling, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Rahul's eyes darted to the photograph, its sepia surface unyielding despite his earlier attempt to destroy it. The 5th boy's face was clearer now, his smile gone, replaced by a look of hunger, his eyes glowing like the Sardar's motif, as if he were the curse's next victim. We have to choose, Rahul whispered, his voice barely audible over Samir's weakening cries. The diary's words echoed in his mind. Choose or it chooses for you. He looked at his friends, Samir, nearly limp in the chain's grip, Vikram, his face pale with terror, Arjun clutching the diary like a lifeline. The figure's eyes flared, and the chains tightened, pulling Samir onto the chair's seat. His scream was cut short, his body slumping as the chains coiled around his legs, binding him to the wood. No, Vikram shouted, lunging forward, grabbing the chains, but they burned his hands, and he fell back, cursing. Rahul pulled harder, his muscles screaming, but the chains were too strong.
their links alive with the Haveli's will. Arjun read aloud from the diary, his voice trembling. The photograph binds the truth. It shows what was, what is, what will be. He looked up, his eyes wide. It's showing us. It's showing us. The photograph lay in the dust, its image now of Samir seated in the chair. The fifth boy standing behind him, his glowing eyes fixed on the others. Rahul's mind raced, the diary's warning clear. One must stay. He looked at Samir, his friend's face pale, his breath shallow, and felt a surge of desperation. "We're not leaving anyone," he shouted, but the chains surged again, wrapping around Samir's arms, pinning him to the chair. The figure's laugh echoed, deeper, more menacing, and the hum became a roar, the walls shaking with its intensity. Rahul's eyes fell on the diary, its pages opened to the Sardar's final words. The chair is eternal. The curse is eternal. Samir's head lolled, his strength gone, and the chains tightened, their links clinking with triumph. Rahul's heart broke, but the figure's glowing eyes locked on him, and he knew the curse was waiting. "We have to break it," he shouted, grabbing the diary and hurling it at the chair. It struck the figure, passing through its shadowed form, and landed in the dust, its pages fluttering. The figure's eyes flared, and the chains lunged, grazing Rahul's leg, burning his skin. Arjun screamed, dropping to his knees, his hands clawing at the chains around Samir. "We can't let it win," he cried, but the chains were relentless, binding Samir tighter, the chair creaking as if alive. Vikram, his face twisted with rage, grabbed another stone, but it shattered against the chair. The figure leaned forward, its glowing eyes sweeping over them, and the hum pulsed through their bones, a chant of inevitability. Rahul's eyes met Samir's, and he saw the fear, the pleading in his friend's gaze. "Don't let me stay," Samir whispered, his voice barely audible. Rahul's throat tightened, tears burning his eyes. The diary's words echoed, "Choose or it chooses." He looked at the figure, its ember-like eyes burning with hunger, and knew the Haveli would not be denied. The chains rattled, the air thickened, and the photograph's image seemed to pulse. The fifth boy's face a mirror of the Sardar's, waiting for the curse to claim its price. The Haveli's basement was a suffocating cage of darkness, its air thick with the stench of rust and rot, pressing against the boys like a living force. Rahul, Vikram, Arjun and Samir were trapped, the iron door sealed behind them, the massive wooden chair at the room's center pulsing with a malevolent energy. Its polished surface gleamed unnaturally in the faint moonlight filtering through a high, cracked window, its heavy iron chains slithering across the stone floor, their links clinking with a predatory rhythm. Samir was caught, a chain coiled tightly around his ankle, dragging him onto the chair's seat, his screams now weak, his body limp from the struggle. The figure in the chair, a shadowed man in a turban, his eyes glowing like burning embers, leaned forward, its gaze searing through them, as if savoring their fear. The diary, lying open in the dust, spoke of the Sardar's curse. One soul must bind to the chair, or none will leave. The photograph, discarded near the chair, showed 5 boys, 4 of them the friends, the 5th a stranger, whose glowing eyes mirrored the Sardar's, his expression a cruel promise of what was to come. Rahul's heart pounded, his hands still gripping Samir's arms, pulling with every ounce of strength, but the chain was unyielding, its links cutting into Samir's skin, drawing thin lines of blood. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice raw, his muscles burning from the effort. Vikram and Arjun pulled too, their faces red with strain, their hands blistered from the chain's icy burn. "We're not losing him," Vikram yelled, his voice breaking, his earlier bravado shattered by the Haveli's relentless grip. Arjun, tears streaming down his face, clutched the diary, his eyes darting between its pages, and Samir's pale, pleading face. "There's got to be something," he sobbed, but the diary's words were merciless. "Choose or it chooses for you." The chains rattled violently, their links snapping like whips, tightening around Samir's legs, pinning him to the chair. The figure's glowing eyes flared brighter, its shadowed form seeming to swell, filling the room with a presence that crushed the air from their lungs. The low, guttural hum, that had haunted them since the staircase was now a deafening roar, shaking the walls, the floor, their very bones. The photograph glinted in the moonlight, its image shifting again. Samir seated in the chair, the fifth boy standing behind him, his glowing eyes fixed on the others, his smile gone, replaced by a look of hunger. Rahul's mind screamed at him to run, to drag his friends out, but the chains were everywhere, circling them, cutting off every path to the sealed door. "We can't let it take him," Rahul shouted, his voice cracking as he pulled harder, his hands slipping on Samir's sweat-slicked arms. Samir's eyes were glassy, his breath shallow, his strength fading as the chair's dark wood seemed to pulse beneath him, drawing him in. Vikram lunged forward, grabbing the chain around Samir's ankle, but it burned his hands and he fell back, cursing, his palms red and blistered. "It's not letting go," he yelled, his voice edged with panic. Arjun flipped through the diary's pages, his hands shaking, his voice trembling as he read aloud. "The chair is the heart of the curse. It binds one to free the rest." He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "It's going to take him, unless we do something." The figure in the chair laughed, a low guttural sound that echoed through the room, chilling their blood. The chains surged, wrapping around Samir's arms, binding him tighter to the chair. His screams weakened to a whimper, his body slumping, his head lolling to one side. Rahul's heart broke, tears burning his eyes, as he looked at his friend, so small and fragile now, caught in the Haveli's grasp. The diary's words echoed in his mind. One soul to bind, one soul to free. He glanced at the photograph, its sepia surface unyielding, the fifth boy's face clearer now, his eyes glowing like the Sardar's, as if he were the curse's next vessel. "We have to break the chain," Vikram shouted, grabbing another stone from the floor, and hurling it at the chair's dark wood. It struck with a dull thud, but the chair didn't splinter. The stone shattered instead, its fragments scattering like dust. The figure's eyes flared, and the chains lunged, grazing Arjun's leg, drawing a cry of pain as he stumbled back. The hum was unbearable now, a chant that pulsed through their bones, the walls trembling with its intensity. Rahul's eyes darted to the diary, its pages open to the Sardar's final warning. "The photograph binds the truth. It shows what was, what is, what will be." "We're out of time," Arjun cried, his voice hysterical. He dropped the diary, lunging for Samir, but the chains snapped at him, forcing him back. Rahul's mind raced, the photograph's image haunting him, Samir in the chair, the fifth boy watching, the curse claiming its pride. He looked at his friends, Vikram, his face pale with rage, Arjun sobbing, his hands shaking, Samir barely conscious, the chains binding him tighter. The figure's glowing eyes swept over them, and Rahul felt the Haveli's will pressing against him, urging a choice. Then Vikram, the tallest, the one who had always been the strongest, stepped forward. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his eyes were resolute. "Let him go," he said, his voice low, trembling but firm. He looked at Rahul, then at Arjun, then at Samir still slumped in the chair. "It wants one of us. I'll do it." Rahul's heart stopped, his breath catching. "No, Vikram, you can't," he shouted, grabbing Vikram's arm, but Vikram shook him off, his eyes fixed on the chair. "I'm not letting it take him," Vikram said, his voice steady now, though his hands shook. He stepped toward the chair, the chains pausing, as if sensing his intent. The figure's eyes narrowed, its glowing gaze locking onto Vikram, and the hum softened, the room holding its breath. "Vikram, don't," Arjun screamed, lunging forward, but Rahul held him back, his own tears falling now. Samir stirred, his eyes fluttering open, his voice weak. "No, don't," he whispered, but the chains tightened around him, and he slumped again. Vikram reached the chair, his movements slow, deliberate, as if every step was a battle against his feet. He grabbed the diary from the floor, clutching it like a shield, and threw himself onto the chair, pushing Samir aside. The chains surged, wrapping around Vikram's arms, chest, and throat with a speed that stole their breath. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the room, his body arching against the chain's grip. The figure's eyes flared brighter, its laugh deeper, more triumphant, as the chains bound Vikram tighter, their links sinking into his skin. Rahul shouted, lunging forward, but the chain snapped at him, forcing him back. Samir slid to the floor, the chain around his ankle loosening, his body free but limp. Arjun sobbed, his hands clawing at the air, as if he could pull Vikram back. The figure leaned forward, its glowing eyes fixed on Vikram, and the hum pulsed once, then fell silent. The iron door creaked open behind them, a sliver of light piercing the darkness, but none of them moved, their eyes locked on Vikram, now bound to the chair, his screams fading to a choked gasp. The photograph glinted in the moonlight, its image shifting one final time. Vikram seated in the chair, the fifth boy's face now his eyes glowing with the same fire as the Sardar's. The other four boys were at the door, their faces pale, their eyes wide with horror. Rahul's heart broke, his knees buckling as he stared at Vikram, his friend, his brother, now part of the Haveli's curse. No, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Arjun grabbed Samir, pulling him to his feet, his voice hysterical. We have to go, now. But Rahul couldn't move, his eyes fixed on Vikram, whose head lolled to one side, his body still, the chains binding him like a shroud. The figure's glowing eyes dimmed, its shadowed form fading into the chair, as if satisfied. The chains stilled, their links gleaming in the moonlight, and the room was silent, the hum gone, the air heavy with the weight of what had happened. Rahul stumbled forward, reaching for Vikram, but the chains snapped at him, a warning, and he fell back, sobbed. We can't leave him, Rahul said, his voice breaking, but the door creaked wider, and Arjun pulled at his arm, his voice desperate. We have to. It let us go. It took him. Samir, barely conscious, leaned on Arjun, his face pale, his breath shallow. Rahul looked at the photograph, its image, a cruel mirror of their reality, and felt the Haveli's will pressing against him, urging them to flee. He took one last look at Vikram, his friend's face pale, his eyes closed. The chains a permanent part of him now. The boys stumbled toward the door, their legs heavy, their hearts shattered. The Haveli was silent, but its presence lingered, watching, waiting. They crossed the threshold, the iron door slamming shut behind them, and the staircase loomed ahead, its shadows deeper now, as if the curse had grown stronger. Vikram's scream echoed in their minds, a sound they would never forget. As they climbed, the Haveli's gaze burning into their back. They had escaped, but at a cost too heavy to bear, and the photograph's truth was clear. The curse was eternal, and the chair was still waiting.
The Haveli staircase seemed to stretch endlessly as Rahul, Arjun, and Samir stumbled upward, their legs heavy with grief and terror, the iron door's final slam still ringing in their ears. The air was cold, thick with a stench of rust and rot, clinging to their skin like a second curse. Vikram's scream echoed in their minds, a raw guttural sound that marked the moment he'd thrown himself onto the chain chair, sacrificing himself to free them from the Haveli's grip. The diary's words burned in Rahul's memory. One soul must bind to the chair, or none will leave. The photograph, left behind in the basement's dust, had shown the truth. Vikram seated in the chair, his face now the fifth boy's, his eyes glowing with the Sardar's fire, while the others stood at the door, their faces pale with horror. The Haveli had claimed its price, but the weight of their escape felt heavier than captivity. The staircase creaked under their weight, each step groaning as if the Haveli resented their departure. The walls were slick with dark, glistening stains, the symbols etched into the stone seeming to pulse in the faint moonlight filtering from above. Samir leaned heavily on Arjun, his ankle bloodied from the chain's grip, his breath shallow, his eyes glassy with Arjun's face was streaked with tears, his hands trembling as he supported his friend, his voice a broken whisper. We left him, he said over and over, as if saying it could undo the truth. Rahul led the way, his heart a knot of guilt and grief. His eyes fixed on the narrow doorway at the top of the stairs, where the grand hall waited. The Haveli's presence pressed against them, its silence more menacing than the chains clinking, as if it were watching, waiting for them to falter. The grand hall was as they'd left it, its marble floor cracked, its portrait staring down with stern, unyielding eyes. The largest painting of the turbaned man with the burning gaze seemed to loom larger now, its presence heavier, as if the Sardar himself were watching from the canvas. The broken frame of the photograph still lay on the floor, its glass shattered, but the photograph itself was gone, left behind in the basement's darkness. Raoul's eyes darted to the spot where they'd found it, and his breath caught. A new photograph hung in its place, its sepia surface gleaming under the moonlight streaming through the cracked windows. The boys froze, their hearts pounding, knowing what they'd see before they looked. Arjun's voice trembled as he pointed. It's different." They approached, their steps slow, their breaths shallow. The photograph showed 4 boys standing at the basement door, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. Behind them, in the shadows, was the chair, and seated in it was Vikram, his body bound in chains, his eyes glowing with the same fire as the Sardar's. The 5th boy was gone, his place taken by Vikram, as if the curse had rewritten the image to reflect its latest claim. Raoul's knees buckled, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. "No," he whispered, tears burning his eyes. "It can't be." Samir, his voice weak, leaned closer, his bloodied ankle leaving smears on the floor. "It's him," he said, his voice breaking. "It's Vikram." The photograph was impossibly clear, every detail of Vikram's face etched in sepia, his broad shoulders, his clenched jaw, the fear in his eyes now replaced by that unnatural glow. The Haveli had taken him, bound him to the chair, and the photograph was its proof, a record of the curse's eternal hunger. Arjun sobbed, his hands clawing at his hair. "We should have stayed. We should have fought harder." But Raoul shook his head, his throat tight. He chose. He saved. The air grew colder, the Haveli's silence heavier, as if it were listening to their grief. The portrait's eyes seemed to follow them, their stern faces mocking their escape. The sound of chains, faint but unmistakable, echoed from the basement, a reminder that the curse was far from done. Raoul's eyes darted to the narrow doorway, now a black moor, leading back to the staircase, and he felt the Haveli's pull again, that strange, insistent tug that had drawn them to the basement. "We need to go," he said, his voice low, urgent. Now they stumbled toward the front door, their footsteps echoing in the vast hall, the portraits watching their every move. Samir limped, his ankle throbbing, but he pushed forward, driven by fear and the need to escape. Arjun clung to him, his sobs quieter now, his eyes hollow. Raoul led the way, his heart heavy with the image of Vikram in the chair, bound forever to the Haveli's curse. The front door was still ajar, as it had been when they entered, its carved floral designs now ghostly in the moonlight. They pushed through, the rusted gates creaking, as they stumbled into the night, the cool air a shock after the Haveli's suffocating grip. The village lay silent beyond the gates, its fields stretching under the sickly crescent moon. The boys didn't look back, their legs carrying them faster, their breaths ragged. The Haveli's silhouette loomed behind them, its windows like dark eyes watching as they fled. The sound of chains faded, but the weight of what they'd left behind did. Vikram's scream, his resolute choice, the photograph's cruel truth. They would carry these with them forever. They reached the edge of the village, collapsing in the grass, their bodies shaking, their minds reeling. "We left him," Arjun whispered again, his voice barely audible. Samir, his face pale, shook his head. "He made us leave. Me. Raoul's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. "He saved us," he said, his voice breaking.
But it's not over. The Haveli. It's still there. He looked back. The Haveli's silhouette, a dark stain against the sky, its windows glowing faintly, as if the photograph were watching them even now. The village was quiet. The children's whispers about the Haveli now a truth they could never unlearn. They stumbled to Raoul's house, the only place they could think to go, their bodies bruised, their souls scarred. His mother, woken by their frantic knocking, gasped at their state. Samir's bloodied ankle, Arjune's tear-streaked face, Raoul's hollow eyes. She asked no questions, her own fear of the Haveli stories keeping her silent as she bandaged Samir's wounds and gave them water. The boys sat in the courtyard, the same place where their foolish dare had begun, now worlds away from the laughter of that night. We can't tell anyone, Raoul said, his voice low. They won't believe us, and if they go there, he trailed off, the thought too heavy to finish. Arjun nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. What about Vikram's family? He asked, his voice trembling. Samir's jaw tight. We say he ran away. It's better than the truth. The lie felt like another betrayal, but the alternative, telling the village about the curse, the chair, the photograph, would only draw others to the Haveli's gates. Days passed, then weeks, but the Haveli's shadow never left them. The village whispered of their return, of Vikram's absence, but no one dared ask too much. The boys avoided each other's eyes, the guilt too raw, the memory of Vikram's scream too fresh. Raoul kept the diary, hidden under his bed, its pages a reminder of the curse's truth. He read it late at night, when the village was silent, searching for a way to break the curse, to free Vikram. But the Sardar's words offered no hope. The chair is eternal. The curse is eternal. One night, unable to sleep, Raoul returned to the Haveli's gates. The moon was full, casting a pale light over the fields, the Haveli's silhouette sharper, more menacing. He didn't cross the threshold, but he stood there, staring at the windows, their dark eyes unblinking. A faint sound reached him, chains dragging across stone, distant but clear. His heart raced, his hands trembling as he clutched the diary. I'm sorry, Vikram, he whispered, tears falling. We'll find a way, I swear. But the Haveli didn't answer. Its windows glowed faintly, as if the photograph were still shifting, still waiting. The curse lived on, its hunger unquenched, the chair still bound in chains, ready for its next guest. Raoul turned away, his steps heavy, knowing the Haveli would always be there, its gates open, its photographs changing, its curse eternal. The village children still whispered, daring each other to approach, unaware of the truth. No one truly escaped the Haveli. They only traded places, leaving one behind to bear the Sardar's wrath, while the photograph recorded it all, a silent witness to the souls it claimed. The Haveli stands silent at the edge of the village, its dark windows watching, its gates rusted, but ever open, beckoning the curious, the brave, the foolish. Raoul turned, and Samir carried the weight of that night, their lives forever scarred by the photograph that shouldn't exist, a sepia image that trapped Vikram's soul and haunts their dreams. The diary's words echo in their minds. The chair is eternal. The curse is eternal. Somewhere in that forsaken basement, the chains still stir, the Sardar's glowing eyes still burn, waiting for the next to take their place. So if you ever hear whispers of an old mansion, where shadows move and pictures change, turn away, because in the Haveli, no one truly escapes. They only trade places, and the photograph is always